This week on the Inside Story, the situation in Gaza reaches a critical point as Israel urges civilians in Rafah to evacuate, and 1.4 million Palestinian refugees saying they have nowhere else left to go. World leaders call on Israel to stop any planned offensive in Rafah, with neighboring Egypt calling it an escalatory action and Jordan calling it a massacre in the making. In the U.S., university students continue their protests in support of the Palestinian people, causing some schools to cancel graduation. All this with presidential elections just 6 months away. Now, on the Inside Story, Gaza War, Widening Crisis.
Welcome to the Inside Story. I'm VOA White House correspondent Anita Powell. The search for an elusive ceasefire continues in Gaza. There are signs of progress in ceasefire talks between Hamas and Israel. But even as both sides look for solutions, Israel continues its military march into Gaza. And the White House walks a political tightrope, urging Israeli restraint while voicing unequivocal support for the Jewish state. VOA White House Bureau Chief Patsy Widakuswara starts our coverage.
Palestinians mourn over loved ones killed in Israeli airstrikes on Rafah Tuesday, while thousands continue to flee following a limited Israeli ground operation overnight in the eastern part of Gaza's most southern city.
This operation will continue until we eliminate Hamas in the Rafah area and in the entire Strips area, or until the return of the first hostage.
Israel's operation in Rafah is intended to pressure Hamas. The militant group agreed to a ceasefire proposal on Monday, but Israel said the plan did not meet its demands to eliminate Hamas from post-war Gaza.
Because Israel's war objective was to make sure that Hamas doesn't control any Gaza anymore. The meaning is that Israel is going to basically to lose the war in that sense.
As Palestinians seek safety, negotiations between Israel and Hamas continue through intermediaries in Cairo. White House National Security spokesperson John Kirby on Tuesday expressed optimism.
A close assessment of the two sides' positions suggests that they should be able to close the remaining gaps. And we're going to do everything we can to support that process and achieve that outcome.
Not many analysts share that optimism. Beyond swapping hostages for peace, both Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar are looking toward their own political survival, said former U.S. negotiator for the Middle East Aaron David Miller via Skype.
In a conflict where two combatants believe that the stakes are existential, that vital national interest, or in the case of Sinwar, his personal survival is at stake, the influence of external parties is limited.
The stakes are also high for President Joe Biden, whose electoral success in November is in part tied to reaching a ceasefire.
And my commitment to the safety of the Jewish people, the security of Israel, and its right to exist as an independent Jewish state is ironclad, even when we disagree.
Hamas has warned Israel there will be no ceasefire if military action continues in Rafah. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News, Washington.
While ceasefire talks continue, so does the Israeli offensive in Gaza and the mounting human toll. According to the Gaza Health Ministry, the offensive has resulted in more than 34,000 Palestinian deaths. What many people see as Israel's indiscriminate use of force in Gaza has been the catalyst for ongoing pro-Palestinian student protests across the nation. But U.S. officials say there is also a worrying rise in anti-Semitic incidents across the country. Natasha Moscovaya reports.
This ancient hatred of Jews didn't begin with the Holocaust. It didn't end with the Holocaust either.
At the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum's annual remembrance ceremony at the U.S. Capitol, President Joe Biden had a message for American Jews and the State of Israel.
Let me reassure you, as your president, you're not alone. You belong. You always have and you always will.
The Anti-Semitism Worldwide Report for 2023, published Sunday by the Anti-Defamation League and Tel Aviv University, revealed a 103% increase over the previous year in acts of violence, vandalism, and harassment targeting American Jews.
Unprecedented levels of anti-Semitism engulfed Jewish communities in capitals all over the planet. It was the worst year for anti-Jewish hate in America that we've ever seen since we started doing this work 45 years ago.
According to the report, nearly 3/4 of American university students have witnessed an anti-Semitic incident in some form since the beginning of the academic year. Many pro-Palestinian protesters, however, insist they are not anti-Semites. Zoe Reagan is a pro-Palestinian protester at the University of Washington in Seattle.
We have a lot of Jewish students amongst us, amongst the organizers here. This isn't about anti-Semitism. This is about being staunchly anti-Zionist, because there are people who are being displaced from their land and exterminated with U.S. taxpayer dollars.
Noah Tishby, co-author of the new book Uncomfortable Conversations with a Jew, says the term Zionism, which simply indicates Jews' right to their own home in the land of Israel, has been hijacked and demonized.
There's nothing wrong with criticizing Israeli government policies. That is not what is happening on campuses in America right now. They literally say resistance by all means necessary. They are praising October 7th. These people are calling to take down the single Jewish state in the world.
Tishby says while Biden's staunch support does make the community feel safer, it doesn't take away her conviction that another Holocaust could happen again if hateful trends are left unchecked.
October 7th felt to the Jewish community like a repeat of the Holocaust. When we heard the same stories of mothers hugging their children while they're being burnt alive, and children and teens and kids hiding in cabinets, and decapitation and mutilation and rapes, I call it the atrocities of October 7th and the atrocities of October 8th. Because October 7th happened, and it took a little less than 2 hours for the anti-Zionist, anti-Israel, anti-Semitic organizations to start praising it.
She says that anti-Semitism is also often an indicator of the presence of deeper problems in a society, and that seeking a scapegoat rarely stops with one group only. Natasha Mozgovaya, VOA News.
The world is closely watching the protests on college campuses across the United States against Israel's conduct of the war in Gaza. Reactions to both the protests and the arrests of some students vary widely, from pride and solidarity to alarm and condemnation. VOA senior diplomatic correspondent Cindy Sain reports from the State Department.
Columbia University in New York City has been the epicenter of pro-Palestinian protests that have spread across America. Students are calling on their universities to disclose and then divest all of their funds related to Israel and to end all academic partnerships with Israel. They are also calling on the United States to stop sending military aid to Israel. The protests are now spreading elsewhere in the world, including demonstrations Tuesday at Berlin's Free University in Germany. Students in Germany, France, the United Kingdom, as well as in Gaza, have praised the American protests. Iran has criticized the police crackdown on some campuses, with Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei tweeting out his support for U.S. students.
Some of the key adversaries of the United States around the world, the likes of Russia, China, Iran, are trying to use these protest movements to really raise more fundamental questions about the health of the American democracy and such issues as whether America is what it claims to be.
One university in Iran even offered to take in expelled American students or any fired professors, though the Middle East Institute's Alex Vatanka told VOA he does not expect there to be a rush of U.S. college students buying plane tickets to Tehran. Another expert at the University of Chicago says he does not believe the protests will have the staying power of the massive U.S. student demonstrations against the Vietnam War in the late 1960s.
Even though these are organic, and even though these are people who care deeply about this issue, by and large, this is not as salient of an issue for large segments of the U.S. population, in the same way that the Vietnam War with the draft, for example.
Chinese leaders have been largely silent on the protest. On a recent visit to China, where anti-government protests are strictly banned, Secretary of State Antony Blinken praised the campus protests.
And in our own country, it's a hallmark of our democracy that our citizens make known their views, their concerns, their anger at any given time.
But Blinken again criticized the silence of protesters about the militant group Hamas, saying they should stop hiding behind civilians, release the hostages they are holding, and lay down their arms to save Palestinian civilians. Cindy Sain, VOA News, the State Department.
Major news organizations have brought coverage of the protests on U.S. campuses to audiences around the world. But as Robin Guest reports, some of the best reporting of the unrest has originated close to home, led by student journalists.
New York City police arrested protesters this week at Columbia University. But before they took action, they attempted to clear the campus of student journalists. By the time police stormed and cleared Hamilton Hall of the occupying protesters, student journalists told VOA there weren't many of them left to report on events.
The NYPD severely restricted the access of members of the press, including the student press, who were on campus. Several members of the student press who were outside Hamilton Hall were removed from the campus entirely. Now, this is very troubling because they weren't there to document or to bear witness to the police action that was going to take place in a sensitive environment.
Bose and Columbia's other student journalists say press freedoms were violated. Nonetheless, their work has inspired others.
Especially like listening to some of the Columbia radio broadcasts. I think that that is a pretty helpful lesson for all of us student journalists to know that, you know, official narratives exist, but also like our reporting is allowed to challenge them.
On the West Coast, riot police cracked down on a pro-Palestinian encampment Thursday at the University of California, Los Angeles. Student journalists were on the front line when police moved in to tear down the encampment and arrest protesters. Their newspaper said at least 4 of their reporters were attacked by unknown assailants.
I do think that what they're doing speaks to the clear and profound importance of student journalists at academic institutions to provide regular updates to faculty and students as to what's happening on their campus, especially under the current circumstances.
Student journalists say safety is a chief concern. Some are reporting in pairs, others wear large press credentials. Their coverage is earning high praise. The Pulitzer Prize Board, which presents awards for outstanding achievements in U.S. journalism, recognized the nation's student journalists for tirelessly covering the protests in the face of personal risk. Legal watchdogs are keeping an eye on events as well, noting that student journalists have been pepper sprayed, hit with rubber bullets, and disciplined by universities for their reporting.
When student journalists are lumped in together with those protesters whom they're trying to cover, it's a disservice to everyone.
At George Washington University, student journalists covered the lead-up to the campus conflicts for months. This encampment is a joint effort of 8 schools in the Washington area. Many journalists have been here since the first tent was pitched in mid-April.
They told us, hey, there's something going on. You guys should get ready. And so with the rest of the news team, we sat down, we put together a coverage plan.
Some student journalists told VOA they simply continue doing what they did before their campuses became international stories and their work garnered recognition. Report the campus news. Robin Guest, VOA News.
This week, Israel ordered the Qatar-based Al Jazeera news channel to cease all operations. Israeli police raided their offices and confiscated their equipment. Al Jazeera officials blasted the move by Israel, calling it a criminal act, and the Foreign Press Association called it a dark day for democracy. The action came after the Netanyahu government passed a law in early April allowing the government to shut down media networks it deems a national security threat. The Netanyahu government has been critical of Al Jazeera for years, accusing the Qatari network of inciting violence against Israel in its reporting. Al Jazeera officials say they will pursue legal options to allow their journalists to continue to work in Israel and Gaza. Since April 18th, over 2,000 people have been arrested for taking part in pro-Palestinian protests on college campuses around the country. To get a feel for what they want and what's motivated them, I spoke with Dinora Getachew, the CEO of DoSomething.org.
These protests are really going to have an impact on the 2024 election cycle, both at the top of the ticket as it relates to the presidential election, but also all the way down the ballot. What we know to be true is that young people's distrust in government and major U.S. institutions has been building and has contributed to this new age of activation on college campuses. Do Something members who range in age from 13 to 25 years old have told us that they don't believe that lawmakers consider their voices a national policy. And that's like an overwhelming majority of them. So only 17% of young people actually believe that lawmakers are hearing their voices.
Thank you so much for speaking to VOA today. We now move to a new page in history. Though the generation that witnessed World War II dwindles with each passing year, the relevance of what they saw resonates with history being made today. As Kane Farbaugh reports from Skokie, Illinois, a Japanese diplomat's act of defiance during World War II saved thousands of lives and is the theme of an ongoing effort by an American musician to pay tribute to the man known as Japanese Schindler.
World-renowned cellist and musician Christina Reiko Cooper weaves a multicultural narrative in many of her performances around the globe.
My mother's Japanese and my father's American.
And her husband is Jewish. Through him, Cooper learned of the story of Chiyune Sugihara, a Japanese diplomat stationed in Kaunas, Lithuania during World War II, who issued visas to Jews fleeing the advancing Nazi army, defying the Japanese government he served.
I know what it means, like to go against authority in the Japanese culture. I mean, that just doesn't happen.
Over a 2-month period in 1940, Sugihara issued more than 2,000 visas to Jewish families, enabling them to travel through the Soviet Union to Japan with transit to another country.
This is a permit.
Then 6-year-old Chaya Leah Walken, now Chaya Small, was among them.
He saved my life. He saved my home. He saved everything.
Small and her immediate family spent the rest of the war in a ghetto in Shanghai, China. They were the only members of their once large extended family to survive the Holocaust.
One of my favorite pictures, the fear.
Small says her parents spent much of their life afterward seeking ways to express their thanks to Sugihara.
We couldn't find him. He became ostracized.
In post-war Japan, Sugihara lived in relative obscurity until his death in 1986. Cooper learned that while his act of mercy was overlooked by his own country during his life, it was never forgotten by those he saved.
It wasn't until the very end of his life that he knew that he even saved one person, much less, thousands.
I am grateful to God for every day of the wonders and the miracles he had done for us, because Sugihara was not a norm, it was a miracle.
Sugihara was recognized as a righteous among the nations, one of Israel's highest honors.
It's something that not a lot of people know about.
Something Leah Rausch says the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center tries to correct through exhibits honoring Sugihara and through public engagements like this performance by Christina Cooper.
Today I'm playing a program with solo cello and shakuhachi, which is a traditional Japanese instrument.
Cooper's performance is an extension of a larger project honoring Sugihara, incorporating choir and symphony in a grand concert that premiered at Carnegie Hall in New York City in 2023. Whether playing in a symphony or a duet, Cooper seeks to keep Sugihara's legacy alive through music.
It's the universal language, right? You don't need words. You don't need visuals. You don't need an understanding of another language. You listen and you absorb, and it goes straight to the soul. So we're hoping that we can bring the story of Sugihara and what he stood for through our music.
For Cooper, who now lives in Israel and is a convert to Judaism, Sugihara's gesture isn't just a history lesson.
This quiet, modest Japanese man was responsible for the existence of my husband and my 3 children and my life as I know it.
Cooper's father-in-law also received a Sugihara visa. Her 3 children are among tens of thousands of descendants alive today because of Sugihara's actions, which is why, to Cooper, the music is more than a tribute, something survivors like Chaya Small understand while watching her perform.
A different way of saying thank you. It was her way of expressing her gratitude.
Thank you for my beautiful children. Thank you for my amazing husband. Thank you for my amazing life. Thank you for everything you did.
Chiyune Sugihara is now a household name in Japan. While some historians have raised doubts about the significance of him issuing the visas,
I attribute that to politics.
survivor Chaya Small says she owes her life to the man she wishes she could have met in person.
I have been so in awe for saving us, for giving us back a country, a world, a people.
Kane Fairbaugh, VOA News, Skokie, Illinois.
6 months remain in the U.S. presidential race between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. In the latest installment of our series, USA Votes 2024, correspondent Scott Stearns looks at what is ahead for the campaigns in the run-up to Election Day.
President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump have 6 months left to persuade American voters to give them a second term. Trump will spend some of that time in state or federal court answering 4 separate indictments on charges that include unlawful retention of national defense information and falsifying business records. He says prosecutors are interfering in the election.
Everything was legal, and they're doing this because it's for politics. They want to get Biden elected. That's the only reason.
The court appearances are reducing Trump's time campaigning, but he says what he calls a political hoax is only making him more popular with voters.
It's a terrible, terrible thing happening in our country, and hopefully November 5th, the most important day in the history of our country, in my opinion, that's called Election Day. Hopefully it's going to change because these people are destroying our country.
The Republican Party last nominated Trump for president at its semi-virtual 2020 convention in North Carolina. This year's Republican convention is in July in the state of Wisconsin. Before then, Trump will need to choose a new running mate. Among those he's believed to be considering for vice president are Florida Senator Marco Rubio, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, South Carolina Senator Tim Scott, and New York Representative Elise Stefanik. As the incumbent president, Biden has the advantage of White House events to keep voters' attention on the campaign trail. Biden is becoming more pointed in his attacks on Trump, while claiming credit for a stronger economy.
Construction of new factories has more than doubled in our administration. Meanwhile, Donald Trump still thinks windmills cause cancer. That's what he said. By the way, remember when he was trying to deal with COVID, he said, just inject a little bleach in your veins. He missed it, all went to his hair.
The Democratic Party last nominated Biden for president at its semi-virtual 2020 convention in Wisconsin. This year's Democratic convention is in August in the state of Illinois. Biden is running again with Vice President Kamala Harris, who's been campaigning for restoring federal abortion protections that were ended when the U.S. Supreme Court overturned the case Roe v. Wade in 2022.
Donald Trump was the president who took away the protections of Roe. Joe Biden will be the president who puts the protections of Roe back in place.
Before November's election day, Biden and Trump are expected to debate. Both men say they're ready. No date's been set. Scott Stearns, VOA News.
Catch up on past episodes at our free streaming service, VOA+. We'll see you next week for the Inside Story.